Hey everyone, welcome to Pink Collar Confessions. I'm your host, Miss Adriana Villanueva Sorella, and today is our very first episode. I'm super excited. We also have a very special guest with us here, Miss Joanna Whaley.
Hello.
First, I want to thank you for being here. It takes a lot of courage to come out and talk about what we're going to be talking about today, and it's honestly, your story is so amazing. When I heard it, I just we became friends after I heard it. So, so I'm super excited for you to be here today.
Thank you for having me.
Do you just want to dive right into things?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's dive right in.
Yeah.
All right. So, can you explain to me a little bit about who you are and what you identify as today?
Yeah. So I'm Joanna again. I am a transgender woman. I came out about 3 years ago. Lived 34 years of my life. You can do the math how old I am, but lived 34 years of my life in a male body and had to kind of navigate the world around me. And so I identify publicly as a transgender woman.
Yeah. What was your upbringing like?
Yeah. I was raised Catholic. We had a very affirming, very open Catholic family. I grew up with a mom who was in beer league softball, so it was very surrounded by, LGBTQ folks.
Okay.
And it was just very normal to be surrounded by lesbian women and just, queer people in general. And our church community was actually pretty progressive within the Catholic world.
Okay.
And then, eventually I found my way to more evangelical, non-denominational churches. And that kind of began to really shape my childhood and my early teen years.
So how much were you guys in the church growing up? Were you guys always there every Sunday, very serious about church?
My grandma was uber Catholic, so we were in church. Okay. She would go to mass every single day of the week and would take me with her, which, when we would also go into hospitals, and she was a Eucharistic minister. She would give communion to people at one of the local hospitals. So I was always surrounded by something church in my whole life. And that was really the backdrop of my whole world, was being a kid and going to church. So that really marked everything that I knew in my world around me.
Yeah. So when did you come out to the church?
That's complicated. So I knew right around the age of 6 to 8, in that range, I knew something was going on with me. I knew that on the inside I felt like a little girl, but I didn't know. We didn't have language when I was a kid for what being trans meant. I do remember a couple times where my mom would notice something and she would ask me if I was gay. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's how I feel, right? But I just felt this little girl inside, but didn't know what that meant or how to move forward with that. But being surrounded by our very accepting family, it wasn't really a big deal. It wasn't something stressful that I had to think about.
Okay.
But when I got into more evangelical churches, I began to hear messages that these things that I felt on the inside of me were wrong. And that began to really kind of make me question myself, feeling that, okay, these things in my thoughts, these things that I have felt since I was a child, apparently they're wrong and they're going to, send me to hell, apparently. And that kind of began the backdrop of me trying to understand how to come out. And so coming out into the church was really kind of coerced in a sense of guilt and shame. I remember I was actually a sophomore in college when I first came out to. And to give you a little context, I started working at this church because I was very into it. Became like a music pastor in this church.
Was your family super involved in that specific church, or were they completely at a different?
No, they were still Catholic. And so I was the black sheep of the family. I went to be, evangelical. I started going to this church, and I remember it was February of 2006 when I first felt that I needed to talk to my pastors, because I was hearing messages, but I trusted them with the information and with the things that I was wrestling with. So I told them, and that began a really wild journey of religion kind of trying to coerce me to stay straight and to have control over what my body should look like or how my body should be presented to the world.
I'm sorry that you dealt with that. That's something really deep.
Yeah.
And it's scary, honestly.
Yeah, it was. And at the time it felt very it felt like it was something I should be doing, you know? And so they were like, if you really want to be like this godly person, you have to do this and you have to look this way and be this way.
Yeah.
So like in the moment, I didn't realize what was about to happen to me for the next 15 years of my life to go through. I was told that I was going to go see a therapist. And this therapist was going to pray for me. This therapist was going to kind of teach me how to be a godly person and show me how, to trust God with the struggles of my life. And many people probably heard this is called conversion therapy.
Yeah.
And so conversion therapy is what I endured for about 15 years of my life.
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with conversion therapy, it is an attempt to use therapeutic methods to change your gender identity or your sexual orientation. And it's actually legal in Michigan now, but it wasn't at the time. So it was very much, acceptable and something that I thought that I had to do.
I didn't even know that conversion therapy was a thing until I think I was in high school, and I heard about it on the news because of a local downriver church.
And that was the church that I worked at.
Okay.
So the church that made really national news in our area for hosting conversion therapy. There was protests, and that was the church that had sent me to conversion therapy.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised and sick about it myself because I grew up in a family that didn't really, we talked about religion, but we had a choice if we wanted to go that route in general. So my parents were very open, and that's something that they actually didn't talk to me about, was the fact that sometimes the church is against this type of way of living. And it is.
And it was bigger than that too, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just the church, the way it was framed. And I'm so thankful for now, there's many churches that I didn't know existed that actually do fully affirm LGBTQ people, but I didn't know they existed back then. So,
and I know people who are very religious and a part of the LGBTQ community.
Yes, yeah.
So,
but the hard part is that many try to use God as the reason that we had to believe these things. And so that made it really hard to be honest about who I was and how I saw myself in the world, because if I see what I see in myself, God is apparently opposed to it. And so theology was really used to control everything about me at one time in my life.
Could you explain to me what a session or program of conversion therapy was like?
Trigger warning for folks that might,
Thank you. We need that.
It is, I'll just kind of explain my first session. Okay. I'll never forget it. It was at this dingy church in Roseville, Michigan.
Oh.
And I walked.
So they took you out of.
So it was like out of the area because I was a pastor in the church, and I didn't want, they didn't want people to see what I was wrestling with. So I had to go out of town to do it. But I remember walking into this dingy church, and there's like this hallway, like in the back hall. It was like you had to go in the back door because it was like a shame to be there. That's how it felt. Yeah. So you walk down into this church basement, and there was like this office with one of those little white noise machines on the outside of it. And I remember the counselor coming out and inviting me in, sitting down, and the lights were really low, and started to ask me questions like, why are you here? What's going on? And that's when I said, I've wrestled with my gender my whole life. And I had been convinced that this wasn't God's best for me.
God didn't love me for that.
And so I sat there and basically they would do trauma therapy with me and try to,
Dig
not
super
to get too
deep.
nerdy on
Yeah.
the psychology, but they would use what's called like psychodynamic theory and
Yeah.
try to find things from your past to blame for you being the
Yes.
way you are. And so they would dig into some of the deepest pains of my life and just attribute blame to those things. And so then we would do like inner child work, and they would try to like get me to
Oh,
be a child and like try to experience. Some therapists call it like planting. And so there
okay.
really is a lot of planting of ideas of things that may not have even been there in the first place.
Mhm.
And so, any therapist watching or listening is cringing right now
Yeah.
but this is a pretty common practice within conversion
Well,
therapy.
so were the people doing the conversion therapy, were they licensed therapists or were they church leaders?
Great question.
Yeah.
I actually was researching today because this organization still exists
Yes.
today. Uses a different name, even though it is illegal
Because
in
it's
Michigan.
illegal. Mhm.
This organization still exists, and I was looking through, and no one there is a licensed clinical therapist,
Okay.
and no one in these places were, one, and also to understand where they're getting the training from is in hyper religious environments that do
Mhm.
believe that it is wrong to be LGBTQ, and have these ideas of belief that a woman should not have control over her own body. And that's
Yes.
where a lot of this training comes from. And so a lot of the therapy licenses are being, issued in those types of environments, which creates this type. And then all the other folks on the staff were more just like um, souped up prayer volunteers, doing pretty intense trauma therapy work. And we're not really qualified to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So was there ever like a point in time where it just all clicked and you're like, this is wrong?
Yes, yes. So I'll give a little backdrop. I was working at a very large church in the area, and this little thing called the COVID-19 pandemic happened.
Oh, wow.
This little thing, right?
Well, how old were you when you started? What year was it when you started this?
I would have been 31 at the time of me trying to understand
Okay.
and really start to come to terms with what was going on in me. But COVID created this environment in the world I worked in where many people who I believed with all my heart were really great people. Yeah, and they're good, there's good people, right? But
Yeah.
I began to watch people who stood on the idea of truth to begin to kind of, share narratives that were really counter to the reality that was going on in our world. And then when George Floyd happened, it really, as a pastor in that time, I was watching people that I loved dearly just treat minority groups really terribly. And it was just so foreign to me because I was so confused by the love that I had experienced from this community and watching how this was all playing out. That began to make me ask questions. What have I been taught my whole life is truth, but is it actually, I really need to investigate that and find out if what I have been told is actually true.
Yeah.
And that led me on like a 2-year journey. Like I tell people all the time, my gender transition, coming as a former pastor, was very like theological. I was trying to understand like what would God think about me in
Yeah.
this process. And that led me to a very deep dive theological study. And that's when I discovered things like there's a concept called queer theology.
Yeah.
Liberation theology actually like helped me come to terms with, oh my gosh, I could actually be a trans person and still like be fine spiritually.
Yes.
And that began kind of the dominoes falling for me of like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, my whole life I've been fighting against my own joy. I've been fighting against my own freedom.
It's funny because when we first met and we had dinner together, we were sitting and talking about this, and I was like, wait a second. You went to conversion therapy strictly due to your gender, not because of your sexuality.
Right.
And I think that people get that confused that we can't, conversion therapy is not just for sexuality. It is also for gender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of unfair blame put into the trans community, but in women in general, that
Mhm.
our bodies are, you know, meant for something, you know, nefarious. Like
Yeah.
it's like our bodies are meant for more than just existing in there for someone else, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that is something that I had to like process through. And the unfair thing that would happen in conversion therapy was my gender and my body, the expression of my gender, was equated to some kind of wrongdoing,
Mhm.
of some sort of, you know, perversion is what people would believe about me just because I was trying to understand myself.
Yeah.
And that's pretty standard within, like, with a lot of trans folks have this experience with spiritual spaces of kind of, you know, um, taking what their body should look like and turning it into something like, and assessing blame
Yeah.
for the wrong things. I always say, even conversion therapy, like the diagnosis was completely wrong, which made the treatment completely wrong, right? Like there was no understanding of what gender dysphoria was. So what we were doing, we were almost setting like AA avoidance tactics to trying to control my body.
Yeah.
And so, and what all that did was frustrate and make my life miserable, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, that just turned into a spiral for years. I just continued to spiral. My mental health
Of
continued to
course.
spiral. I
Because you can't be
became,
yourself either.
yeah, I became a shell of a person
Yeah.
because I was living up to everyone else's expectation of me and not actually feeling free to be me myself.
So I'm assuming that we're here today and you left the church.
I haven't actually, but not that church. Like
Yeah,
right.
specifically that church that
Yes,
made you go through that.
yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is I think that sometimes it's funny. I'll be talking to people in the LGBTQ community, and they're like, "Well, of course you're not a Christian
You're
anymore."
anti.
And
Yeah.
and it's like, actually, I like just went to seminary.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I actually went and got a degree in theology to try and understand more open and affirming theological frameworks to help others be free in their own bodies, in their own lives. And so, yeah, and it's been weird. I still stay connected with folks within non-affirming Christian spaces, and I do get calls all the time. You know, I wish I could be affirming publicly. I
Mhm.
wish I could. And I walk with people all the time through that. Like, why not? Why can't you? And a lot of it has to do with, well, if I come out as being affirming, then I could lose my job and I lose my home and all these things. And there's a lot of things tied up in that. But I talk to pastors all the time who wish they could, and just trying to help them find a way to navigate their world,
Yeah.
you know?
It's hard.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would turn on the church after what you've endured. So it shows a lot of you that you came through this
Mm,
and then became a leader in this environment
mm,
instead.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day and they said that it was just kind of a miracle that I even held on to my faith in general.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
you
Because
know,
that's something that you start doubting,
yeah.
especially
And there were moments where I was like, I don't know, is this really, do I really believe this stuff, right?
yeah.
And it did become very real to me, like throughout the process of seeing people who also held those identities fully affirming me and who I am, was really helpful. So
Yeah. So if say somebody watching today is struggling so hard, what would be your number one advice to give? I know you're huge on advocacy.
yeah.
You have a podcast that's amazing. And I love
Oh,
that
thank
you
you.
bring awareness to this subject because it's so important.
Yeah.
So, what would be your number one
Yeah.
statement for
I
them?
actually started my podcast because I wanted people to know that they were not alone. I think once I started sharing my story, I was shocked. I started this thing like, no one's going to listen to this, you know?
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, so many people were listening from like all over the world. And that really shocked me. But I think that's the one message I want people to hear is that you are not alone. And no matter who you are, who you love, how you look on the outside, like you matter, it's valid. And if you are somebody who's coming from religious environments, I need you to know that like you're not a problem for God, one. But also if you aren't coming from religious environments, like just know that you're okay. Like there's no like lightning bolt coming from the sky for you because your body is doing something that society doesn't want it to.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important for people to hear.
Yeah. And what's your podcast called?
It's just called the Joanna Whaley podcast.
The Joanna Whaley
Pretty simple.
podcast. I love that.
Yeah.
I do want to know what kind of changes would you like to see in the faith-based community and state?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now we have had such an unhealthy marriage of the church and the state. We have had many trying to use out of context Bible passages to try and make laws to force people into their interpretation of faith. And so to the faith community, I would say one is understand that your interpretation of your faith is yours. It is not everyone's. Throughout history, of church history, of human history, people have interpreted the same faith thousands of different ways.
Yeah.
And that to me, that can freak some people out, but that to me brings me comfort to know like I might get something wrong, but understand that there have been generations of people who have had different ideas about these things. So that was what I'd say to the religious community. But to the state, I think really we have to do the work of understanding that, and this might make people mad, but like we have to separate the church and state.
Absolutely.
And I say that as a Christian.
Yeah.
I believe we have to get the church and the state out of alignment with like together, like making laws together. I think that we have used one interpretation seems to be driving many people to do very, very harmful things. And this has played out throughout church history, throughout human history, where governments have used religion to try and control people.
Absolutely.
And I think it's dangerous. And also it's not honoring to those who have different faiths or have no faith at all. Like if people of the state, if you're a Christian and you're somebody who says, I gotta bring God back into the world, like the first thing would be is to remember the human diversity of the world and that is a creation of God. And you are called to steward that and to uplift the diversity of humans.
It's huge. Everyone is so different. Everybody's allowed to be their own human being. And just because you are Christian and you have these beliefs, I might not be.
Exactly.
But do I believe in spirituality? Correct, I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But guess what? I respect you.
Yeah.
And I respect your choices, just as I would expect respect back.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's really important that our government leaders need to lead and not try to force conformity on society.
Yes.
Lead and let human nuance be the beauty that it has always been in this country.
Do you think that our downriver community, do you think that they know that this is happening locally? That this is actually still happening in the world?
You're saying like conversion therapy in general?
Yes, conversion therapy in general. Sorry.
I don't think people do, because I go and I speak at events all over the state of Michigan and I share my story. And when I say I went through conversion therapy and then it's still going on, you could hear audible gasps in the room.
And I've actually been there when that happened one time. And I was somebody that gasped.
Yes.
So I also didn't know that this was happening.
Right. Now, what has happened is that people have gotten really creative about how they name it now. So instead of calling it conversion therapy, okay, we're going to ban conversion therapy. Well, we're just going to call it reparative therapy.
Okay.
So if you ever hear reparative therapy, if you ever hear words like biblical counseling, and you see anything related to LGBTQ things on like a counseling website, that is conversion therapy.
Okay.
And you have to tell lawmakers. Like, I think that's also something the government has to do, is know where these things are happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can somebody like myself, I'm an ally for the LGBTQ community, how can I support people in the space where they don't
Yeah.
feel welcome.
Yeah. I got the privilege to walk in Motor City Pride this last
Yes.
weekend. To
Happy Pride
see,
Month.
thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
that's we're recording this on Pride Month.
Yeah.
And the amount of friends that I had come and that I saw in the streets that I know are not LGBTQ, but they were there
Yeah.
and they show up. That is one of the biggest things people can do, and when we see wrongs being perpetrated against LGBTQ people, to say something and do something. Silence is a
Silence is the
microaggression.
problem.
Silence is a problem.
We need to
Yes.
speak and use our voices. People
Exactly.
that don't speak or don't say anything at all when they see something wrong, you're the issue. You're the problem.
Yeah, and understand that you don't always have to be silent.
Yeah.
If you've been silent for years and maybe you voted one way and you're like, this just isn't right.
had
How
enough.
my neighbors are being treated, or I've believed one thing my whole life and I'm starting to question it. It's okay to change your mind.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is helpful. And also just to be aware of those who are struggling around you, having the understanding that your neighbor who might have a pride flag on their house could be really scared for their life right now.
Yeah. It's very important for people to know that this hate is not completely gone. But from the words of Mallory McMorrow, hate won't win.
Right.
There are people like us in this community. I mean, we have our own pride now, Downriver Pride. I'm so happy that we actually got our own pride here in Downriver. This is the second year that it's happening. It'll be June 20th and 21st, I believe, this year.
Yeah.
So show up.
Yeah.
If you care about your LGBTQ plus family, show up and be there for them. So I'm so happy that we're here today. We did unpack a lot of things.
Yes.
And I appreciate you so much. So is there anything that you want to say?
Yeah, I'll just say that we may be dealing with a lot of opinions in our communities, but it's not a comment section that's going to change someone's mind.
Yes.
It's going to be our kindness to walk with each other towards change, even if it's painfully slow.
Yeah.
Baby steps is going to get us there.
Yeah.
And yes, we need major changes now, but hate will not change overnight. It's going to take kindness to reverse it.
Yes. And that will take some time. So, all right. Before we go, I do want to remind all of you to follow us on Facebook at Downriver for Bodily Autonomy to hear more about the show. And I want to take a moment to remind everyone who is listening what bodily autonomy means. Bodily autonomy means having the right to make your own decisions about your own body. This is free from pressure, external control. It's about consent. It's about dignity and the ability to choose when it comes to healthcare, reproductive rights, just in general, being able to express your own gender. So, and personal safety. So I want everybody to take that as a reminder. Bodily autonomy is so much bigger than some people think. Some people only think reproductive rights are bodily autonomy. No, it's everything relating to your body and who you are. So I wanted to take a reminder. I wanted to thank you again. This is amazing that you did this. And I want everyone to also remember that bodily autonomy is not a privilege. It's a right. So take with that what you need and keep showing up for yourself and keep showing up for our community. And your body is your body and yours alone. So thanks, Joanna.
Thank you.
Yay.